Industry I focused on was airline, specifically Southwest Airline. Basically, in order to make their financials look better than what they were, they took out certain things from their financial reporting, such as special items, such as contract ratifications, which included bonuses, right, and operational disruptions, things that disrupted their operations. And these were all excluded from the non-GAAP, right? They did this again to make their financials look better than what they really are. And this shows how non-GAAP and GAAP are calculated differently. Now the question is why? Well, the reason why they did that are for certain reasons. Those reasons are such as the estimated financial impact, how they predicted that the financial impact of this would be, uh, pre-tax basis, and then also specific expense breakdowns, such as again disruptions, impacts on expenses. Also, the one of the other reasons why was because what they were doing, which was travel expenses reimbursements to customers. So they were doing that. So now they realize that they have to take out certain things from their reporting to again make their financials look better. Yes.
Brandon, I like that you chose to focus on Southwest and mention the contract negotiations and ratifications, bonuses, and operational disruptions. It seems like the operational disruptions are something they wouldn't want the shareholders to see because it raises questions as to why they had the disruptions. Bonuses are something I think all companies should report on, especially if they're publicly traded, because that just allows shareholders to see if the company is giving their leadership bonuses and at times when a company may not be performing to the expectations of reported forecasts.
Interesting that you talked about that because I looked at the fast food industry, specifically Wendy's and McDonald's, and it seems like they use non-GAAP measures to make their business look better towards kind of franchisees that they're trying to sell business like new restaurants to. So when they look at like AUVs, they'll include all stores, which for Wendy's could be 6,000 stores, where when they're using GAAP measurements, they're looking at just their corporate stores, which is only about 300. So obviously those numbers could look really different. And they also do things like that with their system sales. They'll look at GAAP measurement would just be their corporate stores and different forms of revenue, but then they also look at system-wide sales, which would be all the franchisee sales combined. And they have to look at that because that's how they base their revenue numbers off of, because they get a lot of revenue from obviously franchisee fees that happen monthly and marketing fees. So while that plays into their revenue and they look at sales, obviously they're not including franchisee sales in their numbers. So there's definitely always a pretty significant differences between their GAAP and non-GAAP measurements.
Blake, did you see anything regarding if they exclude those one-time franchise fees? I know that, usually when you do franchise fees or deal with franchises, you pay like a one-time fee and then you pay your monthly fees. I mean, do they exclude those one-time fees?
No, the one-time fees are included, but they do break out franchising fees versus like marketing and advertising fees. And I think they do that because the marketing and advertising fees are required to then be spent. Obviously, the franchisees, pay that thinking that it's also then going to be used in that calendar year to help build the business. So those fees are included, but they definitely do break those out. Because they treat them differently from like a spending standpoint.
Blake, I think your points about companies creating numbers to attract franchisees is interesting. It's somewhat elusive to use only their corporate stores for certain measures and not include their franchisees' numbers in other measures. That would mislead potential franchisees who need to make decisions based on non-inclusive numbers.
This definitely reminds me of the sector that I looked into, which was retail. Um, I looked at Costco and Nike, and with Costco, they use comparable sales as a non-GAAP measure. So basically, they use companies that have been open for more than a year. Anything that's been open for less than a year, they don't want to use that because it could inflate their numbers, just due to everyone wanting to flock to a new warehouse that's opening. They want to see what's going on, what it looks like. So they use this measure, which is intended as a supplemental information, um, and not substituted for their net sales presented in the accordance of US GAAP. So this actually defines everything differently. And they've actually used 3 core areas to actually report this, which they use core performance, they use their operational efficiency, and then their competitive advantage. So this focuses on, the businesses, like I said, that's been open for more than a year. They're able to make informed decisions using this and kind of price point any product mix or engagement. And then when I looked at Nike, they kind of had more of a complex non-GAAP measure, since they deal in all different types of markets and countries, but their main focus was in the US and how they don't want to include foreign exchange fluctuations, because this can differ from time to time. Some currencies tend to go down and some currencies tend to go up. They want to have more of a stabilized forecast. They also look at the same thing kind of as Costco. They look at more so their brick and mortar businesses rather than their online sales, because sometimes people deviate and can purchase things from out of the country in our country. So that was one thing that kind of was different. And that was pretty much what I got from their non-GAAP measures that they used.
Trevor, I love both Costco and Nike as companies. It's hard for Costco to use competitive analysis, though, as they can keep the consumer costs at wholesale pricing because of their sure volume purchasing. We do a lot of our household grocery shopping at Costco, and yesterday my partner pointed out the cost of milk at Costco compared to a recent visit to a discount type store like Dollar General. Last week we were working on our rental house and went shopping for some basic supplies at the local Dollar General, and milk was $4.75 a gallon. And at Costco yesterday, 2 gallons of milk is $6.25. The thing I find interesting is the milk you would buy from Dollar General is one of the lowest grade dairy products, where Costco has a principle to provide higher end products at wholesale pricing. And it's interesting because to shop at Costco, you have to have a membership. When shopping at a general store, anyone has that option. On the Nike front, a good read is the story of the Nike founder, Phil Knight, and how he never really thought he would create Nike after struggling as a professor, and has gone on to be one of the most influential persons in business and entrepreneurial space. Nike also has the power of quantity, like Costco. For instance, they can make bulk purchases to produce several 100,000 shoes, whereas a manufacturer like Simple or Hookah will have to have a higher price point because they just don't have the ability to purchase in the volume discounts on raw materials like giants like Nike or Adidas do.
So I chose the hotel industry, and I looked at Marriott and I looked at Hilton. Those were two. Their 10Ks essentially had similar non-GAAP financial measures. They both stated that they use adjusted net income, adjusted diluted EPS, adjusted operating income, and adjusted EBITDA. So essentially, when I was reading through, let's use Marriott, for example, it clearly states there that they exclude reimbursed expenses, merger-related costs, charges, and data costs. And essentially, it also lists like a reason why, and like their meaningful metric was because it allows, the reason that they exclude this is because when they do like a period over period comparison, it's a lot harder to include all those one-time ongoing. So it's kind of like Groupon, where they remove these certain expenses that are essentially disrupting like like breaking down how they view the efficiency and the revenue. So some of the appropriateness that they were using in the hotel industry was non-GAAP measures like RevPAR, which is your revenue per available room. They also use like an ADR, which is an average daily rate. Essentially, RevPAR is crucial. I mean, it's a metric for reflecting revenue generating efficiency, while adjusted net income and adjusted EBITDA provide insight into operational performance by excluding the recurring and non-operational items. So a lot of it came down to essentially excluding these one-time costs and using different metrics to measure how the hotel industries are essentially measuring that and forecasting their revenue and their profitability.
You said that they excluded like the one-time expenses, and I think when Brandon was talking about the airlines, it seems like that they were doing the same thing when they were excluding I think it was like bonuses or like a payout to stewardesses or flight attendants. And then there was a few others that are one time, and it makes it difficult to measure certain things, those expenses. So that was interesting.
Eric, interesting. Marriott and Hilton operate with similar accounting practices. I know a lot of executives move from one company to the next within the same industry, and this might be a factor where Marriott and Hilton utilize similar metrics. I worked for Vail Resorts in a management role for several years. They have their company broken into 3 different sectors: rental, retail, and then another sector is the operational side of things, so the ski resorts and the ticket pricing and that side of things. And then the third is the hospitality. And hospitality is a huge part of their profit. Most of their large resorts have several thousand beds in their base areas. And sitting in their quarterly calls during COVID, it was interesting to hear how the average daily rates would change and how they would report on some numbers but not on other numbers. They'd get called out by Chase Bank and say, why aren't we adhering to the gap analysis?
I can see the good and the bad. I can see obviously the reason why they don't want to, add these things in there, or essentially why they want to break it out. So obviously they want to show what, what really is, the revenue per available room versus adding everything. But I think myself, I like transparency and clarity. So I want to see the true cost. I want to see the end result. I want to see everything factored in, and not kind of, I don't know, I look at it as like kind of hiding something, essentially, is the way I look at it. But I mean, I don't know what your guys' takes are.
I think when, if we kind of compare this to the Groupon case, it may be easier to not report everything, because if you look at the ending, the CEO was fired for reporting everything too early. So it's almost like, should you kind of back off and not report certain things and kind of allow the SEC to kind of ask you, well, what else can you report? Or should you just go ahead and report everything and then figure out, hey, am I in the wrong reporting this? So it's kind of like hard to see which way you should go as an example.
I was going to say, no, it just seems like there's a reason for and not reporting everything. For example, reporting everything is just being honest versus not reporting everything. It's like, oh, well, it seems like, oh, they're trying to get like the best of both worlds, right? Like, oh, giving out them, like, I guess the points to customers and then having those issues and in which they still present a perfect picture of things.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I work in the restaurant industry. And so reading through the 10Ks, I think reading their reasoning as to why they include and don't include things, I think I'm really close to it. So I'm always a little skeptical, but I get what they're trying to do is trying to look at, I think, the overall health of their individual stores in the industry, or like their restaurants as a whole. But McDonald's was much more in your face about noting where they were using non-GAAP and GAAP calculations, and they showed them actually side by side in a lot of the things where Wendy's didn't. So that was just really interesting. And I liked looking at the McDonald's one because it made it easy to compare, and it made it easy to call out where they were including those things and where they weren't.
I chose to look at retail and specifically Starbucks. Starbucks is by far the leader in the coffee shop space, with both corporate and licensed stores. They employ 318,000 people worldwide, and they have 3 operating segments: North America, International, and Channel Partner Development licensed stores. They report that 74% of the revenues come from the Americas, 21% from international operations, and 5% from channel partners. They operate 38,038 stores internationally. Approximately 52% of their total stores are company-owned, and 48% are licensees. Starbucks reports that 74% of its revenues come from drink sales, 22% from food, and 4% from other sources like souvenir cups and coffee accessories sold at their stores. Starbucks licensed stores only account for about 13% of their total revenue. Licensed stores have a lower gross margin as they have to pay royalties and franchisee costs. A lot of the Starbucks stores are owned, as far as the real estate, owned by Starbucks directly, where the licensees usually lease storefronts. As of October 2023 annual report, Starbucks reported $91.316 billion in market capitalization and paid out a yield of $1.96 per dividend per share. In comparison to the U.S. coffee market share of $47.4 billion, Starbucks owns 39.3% of that share. Starbucks reports on both corporate and licensed stores in their K10s. Starbucks rates their risk dependent on the success of the brand, and failure to preserve their value could have a negative financial impact on future results. The rate of marketing as a potential risk is not meeting the mark of the consumer, considering Starbucks has now been around for 50 years. They fear brand royalty may shift to new coffee brands in local areas, and their large corporate dominance may start to lose loyalty by people looking to support more small and local brands. Starbucks has been facing scrutiny over the recent change in working conditions and people realizing the profits are not being shared back to the staff. This led to several stores successfully unionizing. Unionization has led other companies to follow suit in the retail food space. This has impacted the bottom line because there are now more expenses related to higher negotiated wages. Starbucks does operate utilizing GAAP accounting principles. The main reason the Financial Accounting Board suggested GAAP was to limit fraud. I have some personal experience with dealing with the feds in a financial investigation, and it's frustrating because the government expects every company to operate the same. And the reality is a majority of companies operates differently depending on the corporately owned facilities versus their franchise locations. And some companies report only their brick and mortar rather than reporting on also online sales, so they're keeping out a big number of their profits. It just brings up that no matter how much structure is in place between regulatory organizations and generally accepted practices, businesses will operate on the means that demonstrates the best numbers for their specific circumstances, whether that be a loss or a profit.